fabulous Mike Dringenberg. Using the located water. Can everybody hear me okay?
I was going to say something rude about the way they placed the water relative to how they were sitting.
True, yes.
Not exactly the way they were.
Can everybody hear Mike okay?
A little bit louder.
How about that?
Paralepsis.
Better? No feedback? Anybody? Anybody?
All the way up.
There we go.
There. All right, let's rock this. I have my extensive notes here. The first thing I want to talk to you about, Mike, I think is culture, or specifically subculture of Sandman. There's a lot of correlations between Sandman and 80s goth culture, new wave culture. And I imagine, in fact, I don't just imagine, I absolutely know that cultural influences upon Sandman are a lot deeper. Can you talk a little bit about some of those cultural influences?
Well, I can talk about what you mentioned a few of the things that actually influenced me while I was working on the book.
Please do.
A lot. That's just in a nutshell. Whether it was books, whether it was theory, whether it was music, whether it was punk posters, other comics artists. It's a pretty vast and extensive list.
Give us some examples, please.
Be focused about something like that's like saying pick that one spot in the file.
Oh, yesterday you talked to me about there being a Sandman soundtrack.
Oh, okay, it's probably a good
Place to start, right?
Okay, yeah, I could say that there was a very specific soundtrack, at least for the work that I did on the book. I mean, all of us, I'm sure, had our own. But, the kinds of things I was listening to at the time were really not what you'd think of as, very typical goth bands. The Cure and Bauhaus, for example, sure. But, also there were a lot of things like SBK, which was rather unusual, Current 93, Scratch Acid, Faust Can, some of the prog rock things. The stuff that you could call genuinely industrial before industrial essentially just became goth disco. We're talking Industrial Records, which was founded by the members of Throbbing Gristle.
Good old Throbbing Gristle.
Produced their own stuff. That's the kind of thing that I was listening to at the time. And some of the stuff basically crossed into the areas of things that you call audio Dadaism. So, SPK, for example, specialized in just using sound to just create bizarre things in their audiences. Like, for example, a friend of mine once described a show that he saw down in Los Angeles where they had set up a couple of anvils on either end of the stage, and they had a couple of big burly guys with small sledges, and they would get up there and they just start going, and reverberate back and forth through the room. And the guy on the other side was doing exactly the same thing, but the sound was completely out of sync, the tempo was completely out of sync, and it was this barrage of sound waves that literally left the audience sick and nauseous and running outside and vomiting. I found that kind of thing really fascinating. You could say it's the audio equivalent of conceptual art. And I always found artwork very interesting when it made you actually not only reevaluate the art itself, but also reevaluate your role with it. That fascinated me. And I guess we could say that a lot of my experiments in making the reader physically read the book differently, stem from that same interest.
The point we'll touch on further in a moment.
He was kind of insinuatingly.
Yes, indeed. So on the flip side of the culture coin, you could say that it seems to me that Sandman has also had a massive influence on culture following the book. There are varying degrees of ubiquity between being a Sandman fan, or New Wave fan at one point, goth at one point, or there just seems to be certain lifestyle choices that a lot of times Sandman seems to be associated with. Would love to know what your opinions about that are. Like, I have heard I know it's not entirely accurate to say, but of course I've had it said to me, oh, Sandman was the birth of goth culture, which we all know is not true whatsoever. But I would be curious what your opinion is as to the post versus the pre-effect of Sandman upon culture moving forward, subculture moving forward.
Even
subculture would be
the bands that were retroactively labeled goth, like Bauhaus and Cure, for example, didn't really see themselves as that. They were, I guess at the time we referred to them as grave wave bands. And, the bands like the March Violets are completely lost to time, except by the occasional aficionado that goes out and looks for them, But I guess some people refer to a lot of that music as dark wave now, which I always thought was a ridiculous word because it doesn't alliterate as well as grave wave.
I remember when it was called grave wave.
Yeah, but for me to actually comment on whether or not Sandman had any influence on any of that is just sort of irrelevant. I'm certainly not qualified to.
All right then. Moving on.
The one thing I can say about it is that we try to create a book that we enjoyed reading. Mm-hmm. And if anything, I've noticed that over the years, goths tend to be more literate than the vast majority of other indie subcultures. Goths read, mm-hmm. and they read really obscure, interesting, and fascinating things. Mm-hmm. I run into lots of goths who have read Balzac, for example,
certainly,
or Thackeray. They're familiar with these 19th century authors aside from Dickens, even though the sort of Dickensian fair culture kind of leans in on that.
Sure.
You can say that that's kind of an offshoot of it. Steampunk is kind of an offshoot of it in some ways.
Definitely.
But they read, and if they read Sandman and they enjoy reading Sandman, then I think we probably did something right.
Maybe you did. I think one of the biggest differentiators for you, one of the things that always attracted me to your work back, way back when, just a brief aside for some history.
Back when you were wearing
hoodies. Yes. I first met Mike at Comic-Con, I believe, in 1993. I was all of 18 years old.
I was in my suit phase.
He was the first person I ever bought a piece of art from. I was absolutely terrified to meet a real live artist. My goodness, how terrifying. It was absolutely shocking. But of course, Mike was the nicest guy ever. One of the things that what Mike did, as an 18-year-old kid, $20, especially back then, it was a lot of money, right? So I pull out my sketchbook and I put it in front of Mike. He proceeds to take out a micron or a pictograph, I don't remember which it was. Put the book down in front of him and scribble all over it. And I was just like, oh my goodness, this is gas money for 2 months. This is my ramen. What is going to happen? What a waste of money. At which point, Mike pulled out a brush pen and proceeded to do the exact same thing. And I kid you not, in 60 seconds, we had a fully, amazingly realized Sandman piece from him. Absolutely incredible piece. But one of the things that attracted me to Mike's art, aside from buying it, was there was always something really different to me about it. It came from a different place than a lot of the comics I was reading at the time. It certainly wasn't Batman or Superman or really anything. It wasn't Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Sandman was very unique in this, but the art in Sandman was very unique in this as well. So as a differentiator between you and other artists, I think a lot of the things that I see is your influence. They're so deep and so broad in terms of art. They're way outside the comics norm. And just off the top of my head, we talked about today John Singer Sargent influencing your work, Patrick Nagel, Diego Velazquez, Jan Sadak. It's a really, really diverse group of artists that are informing your work. And I would love for you to talk some more about the artistic wells that you have drawn from and where you find those inspirations.
That, I think, is the great advantage of being, frankly, among the academically trained. A lot of guys get into comics because, say, as an example, the Hulk is their favorite character when they're growing up. They read the Hulk when they're 9 years old. Hulk smash! And, it's their lifelong dream to draw the Hulk smashing stuff. And then they turn 18, they get how to draw comics the Marvel way, and they learn how to draw Hulk smashing stuff. And then they do the Stan and Jack this and that, and they go up to Jim Shooter, Hulk smash! And he goes, send us some samples. And, you know, if he's lucky, a few months later, he's going, Hulk smash! He's got his crayons out and his, you know, he's doing it on a page and they're publishing it once a month, you know? And, you know, he goes and meets the fans go, Hulk smash! You know, yeah, Hulk smash! Hulk smash good!
You guys didn't know you were going to get so much Hulk smash from tonight, did you?
Hey, I'm a Peter Sagan fan. Cycling reference for all of you people who follow cycling. Anyway, yeah, I'm using that as kind of an epitome of, you know, a lot of the sort of meat-headed mentality that goes behind making superhero comics. And if anything, I took a distinct loathing to superheroes somewhere in the early 1980s. I mean, the majority of the, well, late 70s actually. Even further than that, actually. Looking back even further on, I think the last superheroic character that I ever followed, if you could really consider that such, was the Marshall Rogers Batman's issues. His stint on Batman with the Yard. Wonderful stuff. But you know, even Marshall, you know, is like his Batman was a complete theater queen. You know, wrap him up in big shadows. This, you know, that's Marshall's Batman in a nutshell. You know, I guess you could say that my Sandman has a certain, you know, that version of the the Batman is in the background someplace. You know, along with, you know, like Yoshi Yamano's Vampire Hunter D, which I remember seeing back in high school and going, wow.
And I know that informed the Sandman visually at some point.
Oh yeah, it definitely had an influence there. You know, that he ended up doing the Sandman piece was like, brought tears to my eyes.
It is a phenomenal piece of work.
Mm-hmm. You know, I can look at that thing all afternoon and never read for it. But anyway, so the majority of the stuff that I was reading in terms of comic books, you know, as far as mainstream American comic books, after maybe 1975 were a few issues of Commandy, Killraven, which was Craig Russell, and truly one of the more great operatic comics characters, especially when Russell started to discover his own style. And some of those pieces today, I look at them and just kind of think, man, things must have been really fucked up at Marvel editorial that they let this kind of genius work out into the market. God bless them for all being so absent-minded they didn't notice. You know? And you know, the other thing was Conan. And even then, it was only Conan, you know, only the issues that were drawn by John Buscema. And Buscema, of course, is one of the great, you know, heroic fantasy comics artists from the 50s and 60s. You know, he cut his teeth doing things, stuff like King Arthur and so on. You know, wonderful stuff. You know, he came from this sort of mystery adventure world, really, rather than from superheroes. Sure. And you know, even that faded out by the time I was, 12, 13. And suddenly, when I was 16, in the middle of summer in my 16th year, I had a very, very strange month in which I lost track of time utterly. I mean, I lost track of it was after school got out for the summer, and I utterly lost track of time. I was making up for all the lost sleep. And I was waking up at obscure hours. I'm not sure really quite whether it was day or whether it was the evening before. I knew how long I'd slept, but I was basically just wandering around for, in the night, just wandering around looking at the world, 3 a.m. going, wow, this is very different than it is in the day. And at the same time, I discovered Led Zeppelin and Heavy Metal Magazine. And, picked up the thing and it was like, wow. And oddly enough, it was like Heavy Metal number 2 with this, Mobius cover line. I was like, Prozac. Yeah. And, that has influenced the way that I've actually told the story ever since. So I've always wanted to basically kind of create that, oh, wow sensation when you look at the page. It's one of the reasons why I'm ridiculously critical about the stuff that I do. I'm very slow because I'm always, if I come up with a design, I'll sit there and I'll work on it for a little bit, and it's like, no, it should be this way because that's cooler. I'll shred that. I don't care. It's like, I've done worked on that page for 3 days. I'll toss it out. Karen was terribly alarmed, when I was, doing some of the Sandman stuff, and I was actually burning pages. you know, the book is a week late, I'm sitting here burning pages because they just weren't cool enough, you know? Well, they weren't.